300 million years ago, our planet looked completely different from today. Imagine a forest where each tree was like a 10-story building, and instead of the familiar plants, vast giant horsetails spread everywhere, reaching heights of 30 meters. These plants did not just adorn the earth, they dominated the ecosystem, creating dense jungles that could be compared to modern tropical forests. Meanwhile, centipedes the length of a baseball bat crawled through these forests, and fish that looked like real monsters swam in the water, with sizes exceeding 1 meter in length. But this is not the most astonishing part. During this period, Earth had eternal summer, with humidity exceeding 90%, creating ideal conditions for the rapid growth of flora and fauna. What is even more shocking? The amount of oxygen in the atmosphere reached 35%, allowing insects to grow to sizes that seem fantastical today. For example, dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters could hunt small animals using their sharp spines. How could such giants survive in that time? The secret lay in the high level of oxygen, which allowed not only insects, but also other creatures to develop to unimaginable sizes. And what about amphibians? Imagine a crocodile living in swamps, but it is not a crocodile, but an amphibian the size of a crocodile hunting its prey. And here it gets truly bizarre. Among these swamps, there could be ancient reptiles that had already begun to evolve into the ancestors of dinosaurs. But what happened after this epoch? How did such amazing creatures disappear from our history? The answer is shocking. Climate changes caused by volcanic activity and changes in ocean levels led to the disappearance of vast areas of forests, and with them, many species. And the most incredible thing? These giants left behind not only fossils but also entire layers of coal, which we use today as a source of energy. Imagine a world where the temperature never drops below 20 degrees and humidity is as high as in a tropical rainforest. During this time, gigantic forests, composed of tree-like ferns and horsetails, covered a large part of the planet's surface, with individual trees reaching heights of 30 meters and creating dense shade. But the most astonishing thing, these conditions fostered an ecosystem teeming with life, where the diversity of species was simply breathtaking. In these tropics, amphibians thrived, capable of breathing both through their skin and with the help of lungs, much like their modern descendants. And what's even more peculiar? Local insects, such as butterflies and beetles, grew to sizes that today seem fantastical, with wingspans of up to 30 centimeters. How was this possible? The answer lies in the oxygen levels, which reached 35%, more than 150% of what we have today. This created conditions under which organisms could grow to unimaginable sizes. These dense forests were home to large predators that hunted smaller creatures, forming complex food chains. But that's not all. There were no distinct seasons on the planet, meaning life was in full swing year-round without interruption. Local plants not only covered the ground, but also formed vast swamps, where entire ecosystems teemed with life. These swamps were traversed by amphibians that could reach lengths of 6 meters, hunting fish and other aquatic creatures. Now imagine, in these conditions, proto-reptiles could have existed, which later evolved into dinosaurs. It's simply incredible. What secrets do these ancient forests hold? How did they transform into coal, which we use today in energy? And you know what? These forests left us not only fossils, but also entire layers of coal that can tell the story of this magical world. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere were 35%, which is 1.5 times higher than the current level of 21%. This meant that life on the planet could develop incredibly quickly. Imagine how insects, which today do not exceed the size of a hand, could reach wingspans of 80 centimeters. These were true giants. How was this possible? The key was that there were vast forests of tall trees that not only absorbed carbon dioxide, but also released oxygen in enormous quantities. For instance, conifers like Sigillaria could grow to 40 meters and more, creating real oxygen factories. And what's even more shocking? These trees had tough bark, allowing them to survive in conditions of constant humidity and heat. But that's not all. With the increase in oxygen, Other forms of life also evolved. Mammals, which were then small creatures, began to evolve into larger and more complex beings. For example, some of them reached sizes comparable to modern dogs, but had rough skin and fur for protection against excessive moisture. What drove such rapid evolution? The secret was that high oxygen concentrations increased metabolism, allowing creatures to hunt and survive more actively. Fish in water bodies became real monsters, reaching lengths of up to 3 meters. Just imagine how it looked. In these conditions, even large amphibians like ancient salamanders could grow to the size of modern crocodiles. But wait, there's more. With such conditions as high oxygen levels and abundant food, life continued to undergo changes that would leave scientists in awe. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some insect species, like giant dragonflies, developed complex flight systems that allowed them to hunt other insects with incredible speed and accuracy. Can you picture these creatures flying over swamps, creating real shows in the sky? But the most amazing thing is that this level of oxygen was not constant. It fluctuated depending on climate conditions, and it was this variability that led to the emergence of numerous forms of life that we can't even imagine. How could all this have changed? Imagine forests where each tree could reach 30 to 40 meters in height and have a trunk up to 2 meters in diameter. This is not a fantasy, but reality from the Carboniferous period when giant club mosses, lepidodendrons, dominated the planet. These plants, resembling modern conifers, had tough bark and strong branches covered in leaves that resembled large needles. Lepidodendrons could grow to sizes comparable to skyscrapers, and their roots delved deep into the earth, providing stability and access to water in the humid tropical climate. But that's not all. Scientists suggest that lepidodendrons could form real forests where competition for light led some of them to develop unique mechanisms to reach maximum height. What's even more astonishing? These giants could reproduce using spores that were carried by wind over long distances, allowing them to colonize new territories. Imagine these spores, the size of a tennis ball, swirling in the air, creating clouds that block out the sun. In such a world, even insects were giants. Their sizes could reach 20 centimeters, allowing them to freely crawl on the trunks of these colossi. Picture a centipede, the length of a baseball bat, exploring the undergrowth where every detail seems enormous. But let's return to the lepidodendrons. Their wood was so strong that it was used for construction and the creation of various tools. Scientific research shows that at certain points in their existence, the area of forests occupied by lepidodendrons could reach up to 30% of the entire landmass. This was a real green ocean. It's fascinating that the spores of lepidodendrons contained special substances that contributed to the formation of coal deposits, which we now find in mines. These deposits became the basis for the formation of coal, which we use in modern energy systems. And the most incredible thing? In the course of evolution, as the climate began to change, lepidodendrons were unable to adapt to the new conditions, leading to their extinction. But their legacy lives on in the coal seams, which serve as a testament to the former glory of nature. The trunks of lepidodendrons were true natural masterpieces, reaching heights of up to 30 meters and diameters of up to 1 meter. Imagine them standing tall like modern high-rise buildings, with a hard bark covered in characteristic rhombic scars. These scars were formed by fallen leaves that left behind marks, like natural tattoos. Each scar is a testament to the unique growth and life of a tree that could live for several hundred years. But what is truly astonishing is that these scars did not just decorate the trunk, they served as a sort of document for scientists studying these ancient plants. By analyzing these marks, researchers can determine the age of the tree and the conditions in which it grew. Furthermore, the bark of lepidodendrons was not only strong, but also remarkably light, allowing them to survive even in the face of strong storms. And what's even more remarkable? These plants could thrive in conditions of high humidity, contributing to their impressive size. Their roots could penetrate up to 8 meters deep in search of water, making them resistant to drought. But that's not all. The leaves of lepidodendrons were long needles covered in a waxy coating that prevented water loss. These adaptations allowed them to survive in conditions where the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was twice as high as it is today. Now imagine that it was these very plants that created the conditions in the ecosystem that led to the emergence of the first seed-bearing plants, which transformed the forests of the earth. It is fascinating that, in the course of their evolution, lepidodendrons were able to create entire forests where they coexisted with other plants, but it was they who left such striking traces in the geological past. Each scar on the trunk is a story that nature has preserved for millions of years, and their majestic neighbors, such as giant ferns, only emphasized their uniqueness and beauty. Giant calamites, which grew so impressively like bamboo, reached heights of up to 20 meters due to unique conditions prevailing in their ecosystem. These plants had hard, hollow stems that allowed them to survive in strong winds and compete with other plants. Remarkably, their structure was so elastic that they could withstand pressure without breaking. In conditions where the level of carbon dioxide exceeded modern levels, calamites used it for photosynthesis with extraordinary efficiency. Imagine a 20-meter stem containing so much chlorophyll that it could absorb sunlight all day long, significantly accelerating the growth of these giants. But that's not the most astonishing fact. In a humid environment with high temperatures, calamites could grow up to 1 meter per year, making them one of the fastest-growing plants of their time. What's even more incredible? These ferns formed dense forests that provided shelter for various animals and contributed to the formation of unique ecosystems. In these forests, there were insects the size of cats and small reptiles that hunted them. Thanks to this dense vegetation, calamites created ideal conditions for the development of other plant species, which in turn enriched the soil and increased its fertility. And now, consider this. These forests could have been home to primitive dinosaur species that likely used these woody plants as a food source. These ferns did not just grow, they dominated landscapes, forming entire ecosystems teeming with life and diversity. But what caused their disappearance? The secret lies in climate changes that led to a decrease in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, significantly affecting their ability to photosynthesize. As a result, these colossal plants could not adapt to the new conditions and gradually gave way to more resilient species. And here's an interesting fact. They left behind vast coal deposits that became the foundation for the energy industry in the future. Imagine colossal tree-like ferns called Ceronius, growing up to 30 meters tall, with leaves that could span several meters. These giants did not merely adorn forests. They formed vast forest ecosystems where life thrived under their shade. The root system of Ceronius was so powerful that it could reach depths of more than 2 meters, allowing the plants to firmly anchor themselves in the soil and efficiently absorb water and nutrients. But what is astonishing is that, despite their size, Ceronius had relatively light and flexible stems, enabling them to bend easily under strong winds without breaking. What is even more remarkable? These ferns were not only tall but also incredibly diverse. There were varieties with feather-like leaves and others with wide leaves resembling giant umbrellas. Now imagine this forest where each fern canopy created a microclimate that housed various insects and small animals. These ferns played a crucial role in the carbon cycle, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, with oxygen levels then being twice as high as today's. But that's not all. The roots of Ceronius formed symbiotic relationships with fungi, enhancing their ability to absorb water and minerals from the soil. An interesting fact: some of these ferns could reproduce not only by seeds but also by spores as large as a tennis ball. This allowed them to quickly adapt to environmental changes and colonize new territories. In such conditions, survival was an art. Only the strongest and most adapted species could dominate this ecosystem. But what is truly astonishing? Despite their grandeur, Ceronius could not survive the changing climate, leading to their mass extinction. However, their legacy lives on in the vast coal deposits they left behind during their existence. Corydeites, the ancestors of modern conifers, formed the basis of the first true forests on Earth, and their sizes were astonishing. Some of them reached heights of 30 meters or more. These remarkable plants had a unique structure, with their leaves covered in hard needles that protected them from being eaten by herbivores. Do you know what happens when a korodite starts growing in conditions of high humidity? It can accumulate water in its body, allowing it to survive even the driest periods. But this is just the beginning of their story. Korodites reproduce through spores that could easily be carried by wind over long distances, facilitating their rapid spread across the entire continent. While other plants struggled for survival, korodites dominated. Their powerful roots penetrated the soil to depths of up to 2 meters, enabling them to successfully compete for resources. But this is not the most extraordinary thing. They also formed symbiotic relationships with fungi, which helped them improve the absorption of nutrients. How many species of korodites do you think there were? Estimates suggest there were more than 100, each with its own unique characteristics adapted to different environmental conditions. Imagine a forest where each tree could be as tall as a multi-story building, and under their dense canopies lived creatures that today seem fantastical. Insects with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters. These giants not only amazed, but also influenced the entire ecosystem. But what is truly shocking is that korodites couldn't survive the global climate changes that began millions of years later. They were displaced by other plants, but left behind entire layers of coal that we now use as a source of energy. It's fascinating that korodites formed the basis for the formation of coal seams, which continue to influence the environment even millions of years after their disappearance. High levels of oxygen in the atmosphere, reaching up to 35%, created ideal conditions for the existence of giant plants that dominated the planet. These plants, such as chordates and giant horsetails, could grow up to 30 meters tall, equivalent to a 10-story building. What is truly astonishing is the absence of pests that could threaten these giants, allowing them to thrive and fill all available space. While modern plants face numerous insects and diseases, at that time, there were virtually none. Only towards the end of this period did the first insects begin to appear, but their size and numbers were negligible compared to what they would later encounter. Imagine these forests where each tree could be as thick as a small car, with plants that for millions of years knew no competition. This is not just remarkable, it changes our understanding of what life might have been like back then. And what is even more shocking? These giants not only survived in conditions of high oxygen levels, but also actively used it for photosynthesis, producing oxygen in vast quantities and maintaining the ecosystem at a level that today seems impossible. As a result, in such conditions, incredible organisms could emerge and develop, including the ancestors of modern reptiles, which also adapted to this oxygen paradise. Each of these plants was not just a part of the ecosystem, but a true giant that left behind only ash and coal as the climate began to change. Imagine that in such an environment, 30-centimeter spores could be carried by wind over great distances, penetrating even the most secluded corners of the forest. And all this happened against the backdrop of a constantly changing climate that gradually led to the disappearance of these giant forms of life. As the oxygen level decreased and the climate changed, the giant plants could not adapt to the new conditions, and their place was taken by smaller species. But how did they manage to survive so long? The secret lay in their ability to photosynthesize and in the fact that they occupied all available space, leaving little room for competitors. These megaplants formed dense forests where life teemed on every level, ensuring stability and diversity. And what is even more intriguing? When these forests disappeared, they left behind rich coal seams that we use today as a source of energy, continuing their legacy millions of years later. Imagine a world where forests grow on swamps, and each drop of water sparkles like a precious gem. These marshy forests were indeed jungles, with trees reaching heights of 30 meters. Their trunks were covered in hard bark, and their dense canopies were home to incredible creatures. The leaves of these plants were as large as an adult's palm, shaped like propeller blades, allowing them to capture and retain moisture from the air. The constant humidity, reaching 90%, created ideal conditions for the growth of diverse plants, including giant ferns that crawled across the ground like living carpets. But this is not the strangest thing. Among them were plants with thick, sticky spores that could reach the size of a tennis ball. These spores were carried by the wind and settled on the surface, creating real green oases. Now imagine how amphibians the size of crocodiles splashed through these swamps, hunting insects that filled the air with their buzzing. In this world, there was no winter, and each morning began with bright sunlight piercing through the leaves, creating light spots on the water's surface. But what is truly remarkable? In these forests lived ancient millipedes as long as a baseball bat, crawling across the wet earth, picking up remnants of vegetation. Their size was so impressive that they dominated the ecosystem, hunting small creatures. These millipedes survived due to the high oxygen level, which was 35%, twice as much as today. Their respiratory system was incredibly efficient, allowing them to reach such sizes. But how could they survive in the conditions of constant humidity and heat? The secret lay in their ability to find shelter in the litter of decaying vegetation, where the temperature was slightly lower than on the surface. These forests, filled with the sounds of life, gradually turned into coal seams, leaving behind traces of giant forms of life that we can still find today. Have you ever wondered how these plants could reproduce in such conditions? The answer lies in their ability to produce seeds that could remain viable for decades, waiting for the right moment to germinate. Imagine vast forests where each tree reached heights of up to 30 meters, and leaves were so large that they could be used as parachutes. As these magnificent plants died, their sturdy trunks and enormous leaves fell to the ground, forming a thick layer of organic material. This process, known as detritusation, was just the beginning of a long journey that eventually led to the formation of coal. Coalification started with the slow decomposition of lifeless plant remains, creating conditions for the life of microorganisms that broke down this mass. Under the influence of heat and pressure that accumulated over time, these remains turned into peat, and then into more complex coal forms. But what is astonishing is that the temperature required for this process reached up to 150 degrees Celsius, allowing organic substances to be converted into coal over millions of years. Further, under the pressure of layers of earth, peat was further transformed into coal, which we know today. What is even more astonishing? In some places, the thickness of coal seams reached up to 100 meters, and their age could be over 300 million years. These coal deposits are the result of a continuous process that has been going on for millions of years and are found all over the world, from the United States to China. Each piece of coal contains the history of ancient forests that once covered the Earth's expanse, where giant insects and reptiles lived. Moreover, it is important to remember that as a result of this process, not only coal deposits were formed, but also rich ecosystems that developed in parallel with the formation of coal. One such example is the Appalachian Coal Basin, where coal was formed in the conditions of a tropical climate that lasted for millions of years. So, imagine a world where each grain of coal is a time capsule, preserving traces of life that once reigned on our planet. The process of coal formation from ancient plants is a remarkable transformation that began with tropical forests filled with giant ferns and conifers, reaching heights of 30 meters. These plants, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, created ideal conditions for growth. When they died, their remains settled at the bottom of swamps, forming thick layers of organic material. But this is just the beginning. In the low-temperature, low-oxygen conditions of these swamps, a process known as peat formation began, which could take millions of years. Imagine this. A layer of peat could reach several meters in thickness, and its composition was not just plant remains, but a complex ecosystem where bacteria, fungi, and other organisms interacted. Over time, under the pressure and heat exerted on these layers, organic matter gradually transformed into coal, primarily consisting of carbon. And here's where it gets fascinating. Coal formed in various forms, from brown coal to anthracite, and each had unique properties and uses. For instance, anthracite, the highest quality coal, contains over 70% carbon and leaves virtually no ash upon combustion. But how did this process become the basis for a geological period's name? The term Carboniferous comes from the fact that coal, derived from these ancient plants, was the primary useful mineral resource used in various industries, including metallurgy and energy. In some regions, such as West Virginia in the USA, coal seams can reach a thickness of 20 meters. And now, imagine that in these coal layers, preserved over millions of years, are not only plant remains, but also traces of life from various organisms, including ancient insects and reptiles. The coal formed during this period became the primary sources of energy we use today. But what's even more remarkable? In some coal deposits, you can find fossilized plants that no longer exist anywhere else on Earth. Imagine a world where dragonflies were not just insects, but true giants in the skies. Meganeurids, which lived during that time, had wingspans of up to 70 centimeters. This is larger than most modern birds. How did they reach such sizes? The answer lies in the high oxygen levels in the atmosphere, which reached 35%. This provided a powerful supply of oxygen to their bodies, allowing them to grow into massive insects. Meganeurids hunted small animals, using their razor-sharp jaws to capture their prey. Yes, you heard correctly. Their jaws were strong enough to tear flesh, and they could reach speeds of up to 25 kilometers per hour. Picture them gliding through the air, gracefully maneuvering like modern hang gliders. These dragonflies use their enormous wings not only for flight, but also for hunting, rising to heights of up to 30 meters to keep an eye on their prey. But that's not the most astonishing part. Do you know what's even more shocking? Meganeurids did not have simple eyes like their modern counterparts. Instead, their eyes consisted of more than 1 million individual facets, allowing them to see almost 360 degrees. This meant they could spot approaching predators from all directions without missing any detail of the surrounding world. Now, imagine their bright bodies gleaming against the green canopy of the dense forests that once covered Earth. These dragonflies were not just hunters, they were dominant creatures in their ecosystem. Do you know what's even more amazing? Fossils of meganeurids show that they could reach lengths of up to 25 centimeters, including the body. Their size and abilities would have astounded even the boldest of science fiction authors. These giant insects existed on the planet for more than 100 million years, and their disappearance remains a mystery to scientists. And do you know what caused their extinction? The most likely cause lies in climate changes and a decrease in oxygen levels, making their existence impossible in the new conditions. As a result, these magnificent creatures left behind only their fossils, and their giant shadows vanished forever from the skies. Imagine a centipede, up to 2.5 meters long, not just an insect, but a true giant among arthropods. Arthroptera, as scientists call it, was the largest land centipede in history, and its size is astonishing. Picture this. It's like having 10 modern dogs standing in a row. Its body consisted of numerous segments, each with its own legs, giving it a terrifying appearance. Did you know that at that time, the oxygen content in the atmosphere was nearly 35% higher than today, making it easier to breathe and creating ideal conditions for such large creatures to thrive? How could it move so quickly? Arthroptera had powerful muscles that allowed it to crawl across the ground, leaving deep tracks resembling furrows. But that's not all. Its long legs were covered in sharp spines that served as protection against predators. And what about food? These centipedes were predators, hunting small animals and possibly even larger creatures, using their sharp tentacles to capture prey. It's hard to imagine how it would look while hunting in dense forests teeming with life. Doesn't it sound like a scene from a science fiction film? But what's truly shocking is that despite its size and power, Arthroptera couldn't survive as the climate changed and oxygen levels decreased. But that's not the most surprising thing. Its fossils are found in the most unexpected places, indicating that these creatures were more widespread than we thought. Some finds show signs that they could create complex burrows, like modern crabs. This centipede was not only a giant, but also a master of adapting to its environment. What's even more amazing? There are data suggesting that Arthroptera could reach sizes that seem impossible today, opening new horizons for studying life on Earth in those distant times. Oxygen in the atmosphere reached 35%, which is twice as much as it is today. This created ideal conditions for the growth of giant insects. dragonflies with wingspans up to 75 centimeters, similar to modern sparrows, and beetles the size of cats hunted their smaller kin. But how was this possible? The increased oxygen level not only promoted their growth, but also altered their physiology. Oxygen entering their bodies allowed them to develop gigantic respiratory systems, enabling them to survive in conditions that are simply unacceptable today. What's even more shocking? These insects could breathe through specialized tubes called tracheae, which ensured efficient oxygen circulation, allowing them to reach such sizes. For instance, some ground-dwelling insects had tracheae longer than 30 centimeters. Imagine them crawling through damp forests, leaving trails that would become the basis for future fossil finds. But wait, there's more. In such oxygen-rich conditions, insects could develop powerful muscles and wings, enabling them not only to fly, but also to hunt their predators. In some archaeological finds, scientists discovered evidence that giant dragonflies could reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour. These unique abilities made them the predators of their time, dominating ecosystems where there were no modern birds or mammals. But how did other organisms survive in such conditions? The answer lies in the fact that during this period, other species also evolved to compete with these giants. For example, some plant species developed hard leaves and thorns to protect themselves from being eaten by large insects. And the most incredible thing? These conditions were so ideal that some insects could reproduce by spores the size of a tennis ball, which is an astonishing fact that opens new horizons for understanding the biology of life on Earth. Imagine giant cockroaches that could reach lengths of 30 centimeters and weigh up to 100 grams. These creatures, known as Archimelachrus, were true monsters of their time, crawling across the earth like our modern rats. But what is truly shocking is their remarkable survival skills. They could hunt other large insects and even small vertebrates. How did they manage to thrive in such a harsh ecosystem? It turns out their sensory organs were incredibly developed. They had enormous antennae that could detect even the slightest air vibrations, making them not only excellent hunters, but also potential prey. Now imagine these cockroaches surviving in the humid tropics, where temperatures reached 35 degrees Celsius and humidity exceeded 90%. These conditions were ideal for their existence, allowing them to reproduce in such numbers that their offspring would literally fill their environment. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some Archimelachrus used their hard exoskeletons for protection against predators, adapting to their surroundings through subtle evolutionary tricks. But that's not all. These cockroaches could survive without food for several weeks, relying on the fat they stored in their bodies. But it doesn't stop there. They also had the ability to fly and could reach heights of up to 2 meters, enabling them to avoid danger and find new food sources. Archimelachrus were true survival champions, and their story doesn't end here. The mystery of their disappearance remains one of the most intriguing in history. What happened to these giants? The answer, like their greatness, remains unsolved. Pulmonoscorpions were true monsters of their time, reaching lengths of up to 70 centimeters. Imagine a creature twice the size of modern scorpions, with powerful pincers capable of tearing prey apart. These predators dominated their ecosystems, hunting small invertebrates and even their own kind. But that's not all. Their unique respiratory system allowed them to survive in low-oxygen environments, which were common during this era. Scorpions used lungs similar to those of modern spiders to efficiently absorb oxygen from the atmosphere. What's even more astonishing? These creatures could remain active in extreme heat, thanks to their ability to regulate their body temperature. Their physical attributes went beyond size and respiration. During hunts, pulmonoscorpions could hide in cracks and crevices, using their hard exoskeleton for camouflage. Their color range was diverse, from bright yellow to deep brown, allowing them to blend into their surroundings and avoid predators. And here's where it gets really wild. Some of them could kill their prey with venom that acted so quickly, the victim didn't even have time to scream. What made them such successful hunters? They had excellent night vision, enabling them to spot prey even in complete darkness. Their pincers were also incredibly strong, capable of crushing the shells of ancient crustaceans. So, if you found yourself in their habitat, you'd need to be extremely cautious. It's fascinating that pulmonoscorpions could survive in the most varied climates, from humid and warm to arid and hot. Their adaptability allowed them to expand their range, making them true survivors in a world full of dangers. And of course, their existence raises many questions. How did they manage to survive such harsh conditions, and what caused their extinction? To this day, it remains a mystery how they disappeared from the face of the earth, leaving behind only fossils that researchers continue to find. While pulmonoscorpions dominated their ecosystems, both in water and on land, there were no large vertebrates capable of controlling the size of arthropods. Why did this happen? The reason is that vertebrates, such as dinosaurs, appeared much later, and at that time, marine life and ecosystems were controlled not only by arthropods, but also by ancient fish that could not compete in size with giant insects. While some sharks could reach 30 meters in length, most were relatively small and could not hunt large arthropods like dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters. It is important to understand that the ecosystem at that time was balanced in such a way that large insects could dominate due to the high oxygen levels, which were 35% compared to the current 21%. This created ideal conditions for the growth and reproduction of these creatures, but it also limited the growth of large predators, as their evolution had not yet occurred. Do you know that such giants as Meganeura could hunt small vertebrates? However, their size and speed did not allow them to control the population of insects, leading to their proliferation in conditions of low competition. On land, there were large lizards and early amphibians, but they were too small to pose a threat to such giants as pulmonoscorpions. And here arises the question, what would the ecosystem look like if predators had evolved in parallel with arthropods? Imagine forests filled with giant insects, and at the same time, powerful predators that could interfere in this chain of life. But this is not all, because some of these insects could reproduce by spores the size of a tennis ball, which further complicated the balance in the ecosystem. Therefore, we can only guess how this interaction could have developed if, during that period on Earth, larger predators had appeared, capable of managing the population of these remarkable creatures. Imagine a world where water bodies teeming with life were home to amphibians the size of dogs, Eriopuses and Diphlocavuluses. These creatures possessed long, slender bodies up to 2 meters in length, with powerful limbs that allowed them to move confidently both on land and in water. For instance, Eriopuses had distinctive wide heads and sharp teeth, making them formidable predators of their time. But what is truly astonishing is that their jaws could open to an angle of up to 180 degrees, enabling them to capture prey as small as a fish, or even another amphibian. Picture them lying in wait for their prey in shallow waters, where sunlight reflected off the surface, and the sounds of tropical fauna filled the air. Diphlocavuluses, on the other hand, had a more robust body and could reach lengths of up to 2.5 meters. Their characteristic long tails served not only for movement, but also for maneuvering during hunts. Did you know that these amphibians could survive in conditions where the oxygen level in water dropped sharply? Their unique respiratory system allowed them to extract oxygen even from poorly oxygenated water, giving them a significant advantage over other creatures. But that's not all. Diphlocavuluses had a protective covering that prevented their skin from drying out, allowing them to undertake long journeys over land in search of new habitats. Now, imagine how these amphibians interacted with their surroundings. They not only hunted, but also became prey for larger predators. Their lives unfolded against a backdrop of constantly changing climate, which created new conditions for survival. How do you think Eriopuses managed to remain at the top of the food chain? They likely developed tactics of concealment and swift attack to avoid encounters with larger predators, such as pulmonoscorpions. It is fascinating to consider that the ecosystem of that time was remarkably diverse. On land, there were early trees reaching heights of up to 30 meters, casting shadows over shallow waters where Eriopuses and Diphlocavuluses hunted. This created ideal conditions for hunting, as not only amphibians, but also many other creatures, including early reptiles, hid under the dense canopy. Could these amphibians compete with reptiles for food? Perhaps it was their unique adaptations that allowed them to carve out their niche in the ecosystem, enabling them to survive in the harsh conditions of that time. And when we think about the lives of these remarkable creatures, we must remember that their existence was just a part of a larger ecosystem where every change could affect multiple species. The secret to their success lay not only in their physical strength, but also in their ability to adapt to the conditions of their environment. Did you know that some of these amphibians could thrive in conditions much hotter and more humid than we can imagine? Eogurinus was not just an amphibian, but a true living legend of its time, reaching lengths of up to 4.5 meters. Imagine that. This giant was as long as a modern crocodile. Picture it swimming in shallow waters, hunting fish and other small creatures with its massive body and powerful limbs. Its jaws were armed with sharp teeth, allowing it to catch prey with remarkable efficiency. But that's not all. Eogurinus was not just a simple predator. Its skin might have been covered in hard scales, providing protection from attacks by more aggressive creatures. How could such large amphibians survive in competition with early reptiles? The answer lies in their ability to adapt to changing environments. These creatures could move both on land and in water, allowing them to occupy various ecological niches. And here's where things get really fascinating. Eogurinus had a well-developed respiratory system, enabling it to hold its breath for extended periods when diving deep to catch its prey. How is that possible? This gave it an advantage in food search when other predators had to return to the surface. It's intriguing to consider that despite its impressive size, Eogurinus could move quickly on land, making it a versatile predator. It's hard to imagine how it would have looked in the midst of modern forests, where each tree could reach the height of 10 stories. How does that sound? And here's something even more astonishing. Eogurinus was not the only giant of its time. There were other amphibians that also reached impressive sizes, some weighing up to 100 kilograms. How could they all coexist in the same space? The secret lay in the diversity of their diets and hunting methods. Ultimately, Eogurinus became one of the most outstanding members of its group, leaving behind numerous mysteries for scientists who continue to try to unravel its secrets. And here's the question: what happened to this extraordinary creature? In order to survive in the conditions of that time, amphibians were forced to remain close to water bodies, as their reproduction depended on water. Many species laid their eggs in water bodies, which provided protection from predators and created ideal conditions for the development of larvae. For example, some of them, like pterosaurs, could lay up to 100 eggs at a time. These eggs had a soft shell that required constant moisture to prevent drying out. Imagine the number of eggs that could be found in one small pond, when around this water body gathered entire colonies of amphibians striving to reproduce. But that's not the most interesting part. When the larvae hatched, they resembled miniature versions of the adult individuals, but with long tails and gills, which allowed them to easily move underwater. Their sizes varied from several centimeters to more than 30 centimeters in length, making them quite noticeable in their aquatic homes. So, how did they cope with competition for resources? The answer lies in their ability to adapt to different environmental conditions. Some species could even inhabit small streams and marshes, where other predators could not reach. And here's a surprise: some amphibians developed unique hunting strategies on their siblings and sisters when food was scarce. Is that really true? Yes, such cases were observed when, in conditions of limited space, only the strongest survived. Adult individuals could reach lengths of up to 1 meter and weigh up to 30 kilograms, placing them at the top of the food chain in their ecosystems. It is important to note that their skin was sticky and could secrete toxic substances, making them dangerous for potential predators. Compare this with modern frogs, which use similar protective mechanisms. And here's something even more shocking. Some of these amphibians could leave the water for short periods to hunt insects or other small animals, diversifying their diet. But their connection to water bodies remained critically important, as only there could they reproduce and develop their young generations. In this context, It is worth considering how the conditions of the surrounding environment shaped their evolution and behavior. It is no less amazing that some of them managed to adapt to life on land, but only near water, highlighting their dependence on water resources. At the end of the Carboniferous period, the world began to change with the appearance of the first reptiles, who became true innovators in the evolution of vertebrates. Imagine this. These creatures not only could survive on land, but also possessed unique features that gave them an advantage over amphibians. For instance, their skin was covered with hard scales that protected them from losing moisture, allowing them to explore drier places. This was particularly important because the wet ecosystems where amphibians lived were becoming increasingly limited. But that's not all. The first reptiles, such as the chromogosaurs, developed eggs with hard shells, enabling them to reproduce away from water. This was a true revolution. They could lay eggs in safe places, protecting their offspring from predators and harsh conditions. And did you know what's most fascinating? These eggs were filled with a special fluid that provided the embryos with everything they needed to develop. While amphibians were dependent on water for reproduction, reptiles were able to conquer new ecosystems, giving them the opportunity to expand and dominate. But wait, there's more. Reptiles began to develop teeth adapted to various types of food, opening new horizons in their diet. It is known that some of them hunted small vertebrates, while others focused on vegetation, creating diversity in their way of life. Imagine them conquering new territories, hunting their prey, using their sharp teeth and agile movements. And what's even more astonishing, some species of reptiles began to migrate over long distances to find more favorable conditions for life. This was unprecedented at the time. Reptiles became key players in ecosystems, changing the dynamics of existence and interaction between species. It's interesting to note that it was precisely these adaptations that allowed them to avoid many threats that their predecessors faced. For example, their ability to regulate temperature allowed them to survive in high-temperature conditions, significantly increasing their chances of survival in a changing climate. The appearance of the first reptiles became a catalyst for evolutionary changes that shaped the planet's appearance for millions of years to come. And in this context, it's worth pondering what other mysteries the history of life on Earth hides. Gillonimus was a small reptile that could boast a length of only 30 centimeters. Imagine a lizard with sharp teeth, capable of hunting insects and small invertebrates in the dense forests of that time. This predator had distinctive features that set it apart from other ancient creatures. Its body was covered in hard scales, and its legs had long, sharp claws, allowing it to move agilely among trees and forest floor. But the most fascinating thing was that Gillonimus was not the only representative of its kind, and there were many other reptiles that coexisted with it, struggling for survival in a competitive environment for resources. Scientists suggest that it was Gillonimus's ability to adapt that allowed it to thrive in a changing environment where climate and ecosystems were constantly shifting. Its ancestors likely lived in water bodies and only later transitioned to land, which was a significant step in the evolution of reptiles. This transition not only changed their way of life, but also their anatomy. Lungs became more developed, and limbs became stronger. Did you know that Gillonimus was one of the first to adapt to life on land, while its predecessors continued to live in water? Its lifestyle gives us insight into how evolution occurred, from aquatic to terrestrial creatures. It's interesting that its jaws were adapted for catching slippery prey, making it an excellent hunter. Thanks to these adaptations, Gillonimus became an integral part of the ecosystem where it had to survive. Its small size and agility allowed it to hide from larger predators. However, its success was constantly threatened by larger reptiles, such as ancient crocodile-like creatures that dominated the food chain. And here's where it gets truly remarkable. Despite its size, Gillonimus left a significant mark on the history of evolution, as such small predators paved the way for the appearance of larger reptiles in the future. For instance, some of its descendants eventually became ancestors of dinosaurs. This process took millions of years, and it's through such changes that we can observe how complex ecosystems have formed over time. And here's something even more surprising. Gillonimus could reproduce once a year, laying eggs in protected nests, which was rare for its time. Each egg was about the size of a chicken egg, and a clutch could contain up to 10 eggs. Such high reproductive capacity could have been key to its survival in the face of intense competition. The most revolutionary step in the evolution of reptiles was the appearance of the amniotic egg, which opened the doors to the colonization of land. Imagine this. An egg surrounded by a protective shell allowed the embryo to develop outside of water, a true innovation for its time. This meant that reptiles gained the ability to reproduce in a wide variety of conditions, rather than being dependent on water bodies, as their ancestors were. Interestingly, the amniotic egg increased the chances of survival for the offspring. It contained reserves of nutrients and protected the embryo from drying out and predators. Each egg could reach the size of a fist, and a single nest could contain up to 20 eggs, thereby increasing the chances of successful reproduction. But that's not all. Thanks to this arrangement, reptiles could conquer new ecosystems where they had previously been unable to exist. Amniotic eggs became not only a protection, but also a means of adapting to various climatic conditions. For example, some species began to lay eggs in deserts, where temperatures could reach 50 degrees Celsius. They developed special structures that allowed the eggs to retain moisture even in the most unfavorable conditions. This was not just a means of protection, it was an entire strategy for survival that later led to the flourishing of reptiles, including dinosaurs. And what is even more astonishing, amniotic eggs became the basis for the evolution of mammals, as such eggs allowed offspring to survive even in the most challenging conditions. Imagine how the best chances for survival were laid in these eggs, and how this influenced the entire future of the animal world. In the end, many of these reptiles became the founders of new ecosystems, and their descendants became dominant species that we see today. Now imagine how these processes continued to develop and what other mysteries the amniotic eggs hold. Pelycosaurs, these remarkable creatures, became true giants of their time, reaching lengths of up to 6 meters and possessing characteristic sails on their backs that could grow up to 2 meters in height. These sails served not only for thermoregulation, but also, presumably, for attracting mates or displaying dominance. Unlike most of their kin, pelycosaurs had a unique jaw structure that allowed them to hunt fish and even small animals. Imagine them, swinging their powerful jaws, devouring prey the size of a small cat. It is fascinating that their teeth were adapted for tearing meat, making them ancestors of modern mammals that later dominated the earth. But what is even more astonishing, despite their size and power, pelycosaurs were not the largest predators of their time. They coexisted with other reptiles that hunted them, and their survival depended on their ability to find shelter and avoid confrontations. You know what happens when such large creatures encounter more aggressive competitors? The answer lies in their evolutionary changes. Pelycosaurs changed their habits, adapting to new conditions. Moreover, their sails likely played a role not only in thermoregulation, but also in social behavior, allowing them to communicate with each other through visual signals. If you thought this was amazing, let me tell you about how their descendants, mammals, inherited some of these traits, creating an incredible diversity of species. Pelycosaurs were not just part of the ecosystem. They laid the foundation for an entire group of creatures that later transformed the planet. It is interesting that their closest relatives, for example, synapsids, evolved in completely different directions, ultimately leading to the appearance of mammals. And here is the most intriguing fact. Some pelycosaurs were herbivorous, and their enormous bodies were adapted for consuming vegetation, placing them in a completely different ecosystem where they played a key role in maintaining balance. This demonstrates how the diversity of creatures in that period shaped ecosystems that we observe today. And you know what is most astonishing? Pelycosaurs, with their unique adaptations and variety of life forms, became key players in the history of evolution, leaving behind mysteries that scientists continue to study. Dimetrodon, the size of a small car, was not just a predator. It became a symbol of a new era in the evolution of terrestrial animals. Imagine it hunting its prey with its powerful jaws, equipped with sharp teeth up to 20 centimeters long. This natural wonder lived in conditions where the Earth's temperature was significantly higher than today, and the atmosphere was rich in carbon dioxide, fostering the growth of dense tropical forests. But what is truly shocking, Dimetrodon was not a dinosaur, but a relative of mammals, making it an important part of our history. Its distinctive crest on its back, reaching up to 70 centimeters in height, served not only for thermoregulation, but also for attracting mates. Unlike its smaller kin, Dimetrodon could weigh up to 400 kilograms, allowing it to dominate its environment. But that's not all. One of the most intriguing features of Dimetrodon was its ability to actively hunt other reptiles and even large invertebrates, making it a top-level predator in the ecosystem. Scientists believe that its appearance catalyzed changes in food chains, allowing more complex forms of life to evolve. And what is truly astonishing, despite its power, Dimetrodon did not survive to see the rise of dinosaurs, but its legacy lives on in modern mammals. Remarkably, its fossilized bones have been found on territories now occupied by the United States and Europe, indicating its wide distribution. These findings allow scientists to reconstruct the picture of life during its time, studying not only the Dimetrodons themselves, but also their environment. And what is most intriguing, some researchers suggest that Dimetrodon may have been one of the first animals to develop thermoregulation, a crucial step in adapting to a changing climate. The climate underwent significant changes at this time, which had a substantial impact on the ecosystem. The temperature on the planet began to decrease, marking a turning point for vegetation and animals. Forests composed of giant horsetails and conifers began to give way to more diverse flora, including the first flowering plants that began to appear on the horizon. During this period, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dropped to 150 parts per million, creating conditions for a cooler and drier climate. As a result, tropical forests were replaced by more open ecosystems, leading to significant changes in food chains. As the climate became more variable, life on Earth faced new challenges. During this time, vast deserts began to form on territories that were once covered by eternal forests. Did you know that some plant species adapted to these conditions by developing thick leaves and deep roots to extract water from underground sources? Meanwhile, animals living in these conditions began to evolve to survive in the new climatic realities. Large reptiles, such as the ancestors of dinosaurs, began to occupy new ecological niches, hunting small mammals and insects that also adapted to the changing environment. It is interesting to note that it was during this period that the first mammals began to develop thermoregulation, giving them a competitive advantage in the changing climate. At the same time, mass extinctions of species occurred that could not adapt to the new conditions. For example, the disappearance of tropical forests led to the loss of many ecosystems, and only the most resilient species managed to survive. But that's not the most astonishing thing. The changing climate was the cause of geological processes that led to the formation of new mountain ranges. At this time, such masses as the Urals and Alps emerged, influencing climatic zones and creating various microclimates that contributed to further biodiversity. And what is even more shocking, these changes were harbingers of the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, which would occur just a few million years later. The gradual cooling of the climate became a true test for the flora and fauna that inhabited the Earth. Imagine a scenario where the temperature began to drop to 30 degrees Celsius and humidity plummeted, creating conditions in which former ecosystems began to crumble. Forests, once teeming with life, gave way to open spaces where only rare and hardy plants thrived. And here's the most intriguing part. Many species that once dominated are now on the brink of extinction. For instance, giant horsetails, which once grew up to 30 meters tall, could no longer survive in conditions where the level of carbon dioxide dropped to 12%. How is this possible? The secret lay in the fact that vegetation required more time for photosynthesis, and changes in the atmosphere negatively impacted their ability to survive. But that's not all. The reduction in vegetation led to the formation of vast deserts where dense forests once stood. These expanses became home to hardy creatures like ancient reptiles, which learned to survive in conditions of food and water scarcity. What's even more astonishing? Due to the disappearance of vegetation, erosion processes began, altering the planet's landscape. Water that once washed the banks of rivers now vanished, leaving behind only dry riverbeds, which in turn changed the migration routes of animals. Remarkably, many species that once hunted in forests were now forced to adapt and switch to new food sources. And here's where things get really strange. Animals like the ancestors of modern lizards changed their habits and began to eat tougher plants and tree bark to survive in the new conditions. This led to the creation of entirely new ecosystems that had never existed before. But as history shows, adaptation is not always a guarantee of survival. The climate changes were so rapid that many species, unable to adapt in time, disappeared forever. And here's the most mind-boggling part. These changes were a harbinger of global catastrophes that will shake the planet in the future when a new ice age begins to engulf the Earth, forever altering the face of life. With the onset of climate change, the vast flora that dominated the forests found itself under threat, marking the beginning of a true catastrophe. Imagine trees, reaching heights of 30 meters, experiencing stress due to sudden temperature and humidity changes. And here's where things get truly bizarre. They weren't just dying, but also losing their leaves and bark, creating conditions for pests like ancient insects to feast on the remaining tissues. Amidst these catastrophic changes, some plant species that survived began to evolve in response to the new challenges. What's most shocking is that these plants started developing hard stems and thick bark to protect themselves from pests and harsh conditions. As a result, old forests gave way to new ecosystems where only the most resilient species survived. But that's not all. Climate change reduced the carbon base, and plants that once dominated could no longer compete for resources. While some species disappeared, others, more adapted, began to fill the gaps. So what happened to the animals that depended on this vast flora? Many found themselves in a situation where their usual food sources disappeared, forcing them to find new ways to survive. And you can't imagine how this affected the entire food chain. The disappearance of plants left predators hungry, while herbivores sought new food sources, leading to their migration. But what's truly remarkable is that some species even began to change their habits, switching to harder and more difficult to digest plants, like the ancient ancestors of lizards. This created entirely new ecological niches that hadn't existed before. By the end of this period, Earth became a stage for new flora and fauna, where survival depended on the ability to adapt to constant changes. Scientific research shows that this is when mass extinctions occurred, and among the disappeared species were even some giant trees, reaching 45 meters in height. These changes in the ecosystem were harbingers of global catastrophes that would soon befall the planet. Climate change has become catastrophic for giant horsetails and ferns that once dominated the Earth. Temperatures rose to 32 degrees Celsius, and carbon dioxide levels reached 90 parts per million, creating conditions in which it became extremely difficult to survive. These plants, which grew up to 12 meters tall, were unable to adapt to the new climate. Meanwhile, horsetails with stems as thick as a hand, which thrived in high humidity, found their rigid stems unable to withstand the new, drier conditions. The secret to the survival of many species lay in their ability to adapt to changing conditions, but for these giants, it was simply impossible. Furthermore, massive forest fires that swept across vast areas not only burned undergrowth, but also the roots of these ancient plants, dealing a fatal blow. At a time when ecosystems were changing rapidly, many animal species also began to disappear, adding further pressure on the remaining plants. Research shows that rainfall decreased by 30%, making life in the forests even more challenging. Horsetails and ferns could not compete with more adaptable species that seemed to thrive in the new conditions. Giant spores that once dispersed in the air could no longer germinate in the drier, hotter soil, signaling the end for entire ecosystems. As a result of these changes, giant horsetails and ferns, once rulers of the Earth, began to disappear from the planet. What is most shocking is that in their absence, entirely new plant species emerged, not only occupying the vacated niches, but also evolving at an incredible speed. At this time, the first true conifers began to appear on Earth, becoming giants among the plant life. Imagine forests where the height of some conifers reached 30 meters, and the diameter of their trunks exceeded 1 meter. These trees began to dominate ecosystems, creating new conditions for life. Their tough bark served as protection against pests and adverse weather conditions. The unique ability of conifers to photosynthesize in low humidity conditions allowed them to survive in a changing climate. Did you know that thanks to the special structure of their needles, which could retain moisture, conifers became the main producers of oxygen in the atmosphere? This was a breakthrough for life on the planet, as oxygen levels rose to 30%. And here's where it gets really interesting. These trees could reproduce using seeds similar to those of walnuts, which also contributed to their spread. They began to fill the gaps left by disappearing plants, and their roots strengthened the soil, preventing erosion. But that's not the strangest part. Conifers had cones that could reach the size of a tennis ball, and these cones contained dozens of seeds ready to germinate. At this time, various insect species also inhabited the earth, using the resin of conifers as a protective barrier against predators. Have you ever wondered how this affected the ecosystem? The secret was that conifers created new micro-ecosystems, which in turn attracted new insects and animals. Unexpectedly, these coniferous forests became home to the first mammals, which began to adapt to life among these giants. These mammals were small creatures, the size of a modern mouse, and their diet consisted of the seeds and shoots of conifers. And the most amazing thing? Conifers left behind entire layers of fossilized remains, which are still studied by scientists. The preserved remains of conifers show that some species could live for more than 200 years, and their wood was so dense that it was used to create the first tools and dwellings. Seed plants began to conquer the planet, marking a true revolution in the world of flora. Imagine, in increasingly arid and hot climates, plants with seeds that could survive even the harshest conditions emerged. These seed plants had tough coats protecting the seeds from drying out, allowing them to remain viable even when other species could not. Some, like the ginkgo biloba, began to dominate ecosystems due to their adaptations. Their leaves had a unique shape that minimized water loss, and their roots could penetrate deeply in search of water. What is even more remarkable is that seeds of plants like pine could remain dormant for many years, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. But that's not all. Seed plants began to actively use pollinators like insects, which facilitated their spread. Did you know that some seeds could be as small as a pea, while others could reach up to 30 centimeters in length? This ensured their high chances of survival, as larger seeds contained more nutrients for initial growth. Thanks to this, seed plants were able to occupy various ecological niches, leading to a true diversity of forms and sizes. For instance, some adapted to life in sandy deserts, developing root systems that could retain moisture and nutrients even in the driest conditions. The secret to their survival lay in their ability to photosynthesize, which was much more efficient than that of spore-bearing plants. This efficiency allowed them to grow faster and occupy new territories. While spore-bearing plants relied on moisture for reproduction, seed plants could disperse their seeds over long distances using wind or animals. And the most incredible part? Some seeds could remain viable even after passing through the digestive systems of animals, allowing them to germinate in completely new places. This was not just survival, it was true evolution. The reduction of oxygen levels to 21% in the atmosphere posed a significant challenge for the insects living at that time. Imagine giant insects like dragonflies with a wingspan of 80 centimeters having to adapt to conditions where oxygen was significantly reduced. This had a profound impact on their sizes. Many species began to shrink to survive in conditions where breathing became increasingly difficult. But what is most astonishing? When oxygen levels dropped, some insects developed new ways of breathing that allowed them to extract more oxygen from the air. For instance, their tracheae, the tubes through which air reaches the cells, became larger. This evolution enabled some species to survive, but the overall trend was towards smaller sizes. Interestingly, despite this shrinkage, there were individuals that grew to sizes that seem fantastical today. For example, ants the size of a human hand. Yes, They existed. They used their size to dominate their ecosystem, but their numbers quickly declined as oxygen levels continued to drop. What is even more remarkable is that some insects began to develop protective mechanisms to survive in conditions where competition for oxygen was fierce. Their wings became more transparent to allow light to pass through, and they even increased in size to use every available millimeter of oxygen. At this time, many species continued to exist, but their sizes and forms changed under the pressure of the surrounding environment. For instance, beetles that could previously reach the size of a walnut became the size of a pea, but their cunning survival strategies and adaptations allowed them to maintain their positions in the ecosystem. You won't believe this, but during this period, despite the overall trend towards smaller sizes, some of the largest insects that ever existed on the planet developed. For example, the Meganeura, whose wingspans could exceed 30 centimeters. All of this happened amidst the constant pressure of climate change and ecosystem shifts. The question is, how did these insects manage to survive and adapt to such harsh conditions? The answer lies in their ability to evolve rapidly, making their study truly fascinating. Imagine a world where creatures at the top of the food chain were the ancestors of today's mammals. These Permian therapsids were unlike their reptilian neighbors. They had higher cheeks and teeth that allowed them to chew food, crucial for their survival. Did you know that some of them could reach lengths of over 3 meters? Giants like Dimetrodon had a distinctive sail on their backs, not only making them appear fearsome, but also helping them regulate their body temperature in cold days. But that's not all. Therapsids had unique features like 7- and 8-toothed molars, which helped them effectively hunt their prey. Did you know that their limbs were positioned beneath their bodies, allowing them to move more efficiently on land compared to their ancestors who mostly moved side to side? What's even more astonishing? Due to their ability to evolve, therapsids began developing fur, a significant step towards the emergence of mammals. Their descendants, like synapsids, had more complex respiratory systems, enabling them to breathe more efficiently than their predecessors. But how did they cope with harsh environmental conditions? Their ability to adapt to climate and ecosystem changes allowed some species to survive even the toughest times, when climate changed and resource competition increased. These creatures, which were both predators and herbivores, occupied diverse ecological niches, allowing them to dominate their environment. It's fascinating that therapsids laid the foundation for the further evolution of mammals, and their traits can be traced in modern animals. Notably, some therapsid mammals could give birth to 3 to 6 offspring at a time, giving them an advantage in survival. This process led to them becoming some of the first animals to care for their young, a practice that later became the norm among mammals. And now, the most amazing part. Therapsids exhibited an incredible diversity of shapes and sizes, from small creatures to giants that could challenge the largest predators of their time. Gorgonopsids were not just ordinary predators. They were the first saber-toothed creatures on Earth, and their sizes are astonishing. Some specimens could reach lengths of 2 meters. These creatures, with their unique teeth resembling sharp sabers, hunted their prey with remarkable efficiency. Did you know that Gorgonopsids had a complex jaw structure that allowed them to tear the flesh of their victims, making them some of the most advanced predators of their time? Their powerful front limbs securely held their prey, while their hind legs provided speed and agility. But that's not the most amazing part. Gorgonopsids had tough skin that protected them from attacks by other predators and even harsh environmental conditions. Some of them had prominent features such as large eye sockets, which allowed them to see well in low-light conditions. Now imagine these extraordinary creatures hunting in the dense forests of the Permian period, where every shadow could hide potential prey or danger. Their ancient neighbors, the therapsids, could reach similar sizes, and competition for food was fierce. But Gorgonopsids were not just powerful predators. Their evolutionary traits laid the foundation for the emergence of more modern mammals. How did they survive in such fierce competition? The secret lay in their ability to adapt to changing environmental conditions, which made them dominant predators in their ecosystems. Moreover, their developing social structure allowed Gorgonopsids to hunt in groups, increasing their chances of successfully capturing prey. And the most incredible thing, Gorgonopsids went extinct only 30 million years before the appearance of dinosaurs, leaving behind numerous mysteries about their existence and evolution. These creatures may be the first step in understanding how simple predators evolved into complex ecosystems. Amidst the harsh competition of predators, herbivorous reptiles emerged, with pariasaurs occupying a special place among them. These creatures, the size of a small car, could reach lengths of up to 4 meters and had powerful jaws that allowed them to handle the tough vegetation covering the earth. Imagine them chewing leaves, using teeth-like fangs to tear through hard stems. But this is not the most astonishing part. Pariasaurs were among the first reptiles to actively use their environment for protection against predators. Their skin, protected by a thick keratinous layer, enabled them to survive in conditions where many other species went extinct. But what is even more shocking? These reptiles had a unique thermoregulation system that allowed them to maintain an optimal body temperature, making them more resilient than their predecessors. Their ability to adapt to various climatic conditions allowed pariasaurs to dominate the ecosystems they inhabited. But how did they manage this? It turns out that pariasaurs could move short distances at high speeds, helping them avoid attacks from predators. This was a time when insects and other small creatures began to evolve in response to the appearance of new herbivores. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. Pariasaurs not only survived, but also actively contributed to the development of ecosystems, creating new niches for other species. Their large size and ability to process vegetation altered the landscape, allowing new forms of life to emerge. For instance, some plant species began to produce toxic substances in response to their consumption, which became the basis for further evolution of flora and fauna. And the most astonishing fact, pariasaurs were the ancestors of modern turtles, and their legacy continues today in the form of various herbivorous reptiles. This connection between ancient and modern species opens new horizons for understanding the evolutionary processes that occurred during that period. Supercontinent Pangaea began to form as a result of colossal tectonic processes that transformed the face of the Earth. Imagine this. The area of Pangaea was approximately 60 million square kilometers, making it larger than all of today's land combined. But it was not just a vast chunk of land. It was a genuine ecosystem capable of altering the planet's climate. Oceans formed around Pangaea, occupying nearly 30% of Earth's surface, creating unique microclimates. These conditions led to the emergence of vast deserts stretching for thousands of kilometers, where temperatures could reach 40 degrees Celsius. What is truly astonishing is that due to its immense mass, Pangaea impeded the normal circulation of atmospheric currents, causing abrupt weather changes. In the north of the continent, glaciers stretched for hundreds of kilometers, while in the south, in the tropics, lush jungles thrived, with giant ferns reaching heights of 30 meters. As a result of this contrasting climate, the diversity of life on Pangaea was remarkable, from tiny insects to enormous dinosaurs that could reach lengths of 30 meters. Here's where the real intrigue begins. How did continental drift affect evolution? The secret lay in the isolation of certain species, which facilitated their unique development and adaptation to various conditions. For instance, in isolated regions, entirely new animal species emerged that could have become the ancestors of today's mammals. Pangaea began to break apart, and with this process, the climate changed again, creating new ecological niches. But the most fascinating fact is that before Pangaea's breakup, some species could live up to 100 years, allowing them to adapt to changing conditions, and this discovery changes our understanding of evolution. Intracontinental deserts, which emerged at the very heart of a supercontinent, were a breathtaking sight. Vast expanses with cracks in the earth and rare plants that could survive conditions reminiscent of today's Sahara. These deserts were more than just arid wastelands. They became true ecosystems, home to unique plant and animal species that had adapted to extreme conditions. For instance, some plants developed roots up to 7 meters long to reach hidden water sources, allowing them to survive in places where rain fell only once every few years. But the most astonishing fact was that these deserts were also inhabited by giant lizards, the size of modern-day crocodiles, which hunted small mammals and insects, thriving in conditions that would seem unbearable to most other creatures. These lizards had powerful jaws and sharp teeth, enabling them to tear their prey apart, making them dominant predators in their habitat. But that's not all. These deserts were also home to remarkable insects, such as giant beetles, the size of an adult human's fist, capable of lifting loads many times their own weight. In this harsh world of survival, success depended not only on strength, but also on cunning. Many species evolved protective mechanisms like hard shells or the ability to change skin color to blend into their surroundings. But what is even more astonishing is that these deserts contain traces of ancient animals, leaving their footprints on the scorched earth, preserved to this day. These footprints allow us to glimpse into the lives of those times when the climate was entirely different, and the animals that dominated then looked unlike anything we can imagine. Now imagine this: deserts where sand and rocks intertwine with the remnants of ancient creatures that once roamed these lands. Each step on this land is a step back in time, filled with mysteries and riddles that still await discovery. Geographical changes during the Permian period fundamentally altered the planet's appearance and, consequently, life on it. Imagine continents gradually merging into one vast supercontinent called Pangaea, which occupied nearly all of Earth's land and was surrounded by a single ocean. This transformation created new ecosystems where inhabitants were forced to adapt to entirely different conditions. For instance, the merging of continents resulted in mountain ranges like the Ural, reaching heights of 1,000 meters. These mountains not only served as barriers to species migration, but also caused changes in climate. Some regions became arid, while others developed lush tropical forests. In such conditions, new plant and animal species began to evolve, capable of surviving in extreme environments. Picture forests inhabited by giant ferns reaching the height of a 3-story building, and ancient conifers resembling modern sequoias. But that's not all. During this time, the first reptiles appeared on Earth, beginning to dominate the new ecosystems. They hunted amphibians and insects that reached sizes we can hardly imagine. For example, some ancient insects had wingspans of up to 60 centimeters. It's no surprise that such conditions led to a rapid increase in biodiversity. Now imagine what happens when the climate starts to change. Many species, unable to adapt in time, face the threat of extinction. And here comes the truly bizarre. At the end of the Permian period, the largest mass extinction in Earth's history occurred, with around 95% of all marine species and more than 70% of land animals disappearing. This catastrophe left behind a void that new forms of life began to fill. It was during this time that the ancestors of dinosaurs and mammals emerged, who would dominate the next era. And the most astonishing fact: these changes laid the foundation for the appearance of the modern ecosystems we know today. Against this backdrop, the ecological situation was becoming increasingly critical. Due to global warming, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached over 3,000 parts per million, which was several times higher than current levels. This created a greenhouse effect similar to what we observe today, but in a much more extreme form. Oceans began to overheat, leading to mass extinctions of marine organisms. Imagine this. The temperature of seawater rose to 30 degrees Celsius, which was catastrophic for coral reefs that started to crumble. Additionally, the increasing acidity of the oceans due to the absorption of carbon dioxide caused the mass collapse of ecosystems that housed marine life. Meanwhile, on land, there was genuine panic. Forests of giant ferns and conifers were suffering from drought, and once lush rivers turned into mere gray stripes on the map. But this was not the most peculiar thing. Scientists discovered that many species that survived began to migrate in search of more favorable conditions, leaving behind desolate territories. At the same time, new predators emerged, hunting weakened and vulnerable creatures, further complicating the situation. And the most shocking thing? The number of species that disappeared during this period exceeded 90%. This was a catastrophe without precedent in history, and it was at this moment that the first precursors of dinosaurs began to appear on the horizon, ready to occupy the vacant niches and usher in a new era of life and diversity. Siberian traps, formed as a result of colossal volcanic eruptions, became one of the most catastrophic phenomena on the planet. Imagine a region larger than the entire area of France, covered in lava flows and volcanic rocks that were expelled with such force that they formed multi-kilometer layers of basalt. These eruptions occurred around 250 million years ago and lasted, according to some estimates, for more than 1 million years. Volcanic activity released enormous volumes of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere, leading to a dramatic change in climate. Do you know what happens when 30 million tons of carbon dioxide enter the atmosphere? It causes a greenhouse effect that heats the planet to unbearable temperatures. As a result, ecosystems that were just beginning to recover from previous catastrophes were once again threatened. But that's not all. Surface temperatures could reach 130 degrees Celsius, and oceans began to boil. Now imagine the surviving animals trying to adapt to such conditions. Many species went extinct, leaving only small groups that could endure these extreme changes. For example, the first ancestors of mammals that managed to survive found themselves in an environment where their familiar habitats were being destroyed before their eyes. Volcanic activity also led to the formation of vast craters and new mountain ranges, forever altering the landscape of Siberia. Scientists have calculated that the area covered by basalt as a result of these eruptions is more than 100 million square kilometers. This created new ecological niches and opportunities for survival for those who remained, but also new threats. And here's the most fascinating part. The changes in ecosystems caused by the Siberian traps were one of the factors that contributed to the mass extinction, in which more than 95% of all species disappeared. These volcanic catastrophes not only altered the climate, but also laid the foundation for a new era, in which new species replaced the old ones. At that moment, something extraordinary was happening on the planet. Volcanic eruptions in Siberia were releasing such volumes of carbon that the level of carbon dioxide was increasing to 6,000 parts per million, which is twice as much as it is now. This change was causing a sharp rise in temperature, up to 35 degrees Celsius, leading to global warming. But wait, that's not all. Due to the increase in temperature, the oceans were releasing enormous amounts of methane, which in turn was only exacerbating the greenhouse effect. Imagine how ancient marine creatures managed to survive in such conditions. The disappearance of creatures like trilobites and belemnites was just a part of the catastrophe that swept through the entire biosphere of the Earth. Changes in the composition of water bodies led to a shortage of oxygen for marine organisms, and one can only imagine how millions of tons of marine life suffocated in their own homes. And the most astonishing thing, during this period, more than 97% of all species on the planet disappeared, including the rich flora and fauna that had existed before. But marine creatures were not the only ones suffering. On land, giant plants and animals were also under threat. Changes in climate led to the disappearance of forests, which were home to creatures like large herbivores, the size of modern crocodiles. What happened to these giants? Their usual sources of food were disappearing day by day, and as a result, many species were unable to adapt to the rapidly changing conditions. It is important to note that this extinction was the result of a combination of factors: volcanic activity, climate change, and a decrease in oxygen levels in the oceans. But do you know what was happening on Earth at that time? New species were emerging, which later became the basis for all the biodiversity we know today. Scientists believe that it was after this catastrophe that the age of dinosaurs began, which started to dominate the planet and fill the ecosystems that had been vacated by previous forms of life. In this context, one of the most fascinating pages in the history of the Earth is revealed, where on the ruins of extinct creatures, new forms of life were emerging, ready to take their place. A catastrophe unfolded on the planet. 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates disappeared in a matter of moments. Imagine oceans that were once teeming with life turning into a desert, devoid of any living creatures. These changes were triggered by a catastrophic event when volcanoes along fault lines began to erupt lava and gases, leading to a sharp increase in carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. the concentration of carbon dioxide rose to a critical level for most life forms. What happened next? The temperature of the oceans rose by several degrees, causing mass extinctions of coral reefs, which were home to numerous marine creatures. These reefs, once stretching for thousands of kilometers, began to disintegrate, and as a result, 90% of all marine organisms were unable to adapt to the new conditions. On land, the situation was no better. Giant reptiles like dimetrodons found themselves in a precarious situation. Their usual food sources disappeared, and competition for the remaining resources increased. Groups of these animals, once dominant on the planet, began to massively die out, leaving only small populations for survival. But the most shocking thing was that only the most adaptable species survived, which managed to adapt to the new conditions. This meant that dinosaurs, which later dominated this ecosystem, were replaced by small mammals. They hid in burrows and survived in conditions where the surface was in complete chaos. How did these small creatures survive? The secret lies in their ability to live nocturnally. They could avoid predators and find food in the dark. And the most astonishing thing? That these tiny mammals, in the future, became the ancestors of modern mammals, including humans. It is interesting that all these events occurred against the backdrop of the largest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history, when lava flows stretched for thousands of kilometers, covering the land with a thick layer of ash. This layer of ash was so great that it blocked out sunlight, and the temperature on the planet dropped to catastrophic levels, further reducing the chances of survival for millions of species. Now imagine how these changes affected the climate and ecosystems, which seem to have changed forever. While mammals were seeking ways to survive, the oceans were undergoing catastrophic changes. Dead zones, formed due to a lack of oxygen, covered entire regions where life was practically impossible. These zones emerged due to the blooming of microscopic algae, which, multiplying in vast numbers, consumed all the oxygen, leaving marine inhabitants with no chance of survival. Imagine. The area of these dead zones was comparable to the territories of entire countries, and in some places, there was so little oxygen in the water that fish couldn't breathe at depths of just a few meters. But that's not all. Acidic rains, caused by volcanic activity, fell on the land, destroying ecosystems and wiping out vegetation. These rains had a pH level below 5, making them more acidic than vinegar. This led to many plant species being unable to survive, and those that did often became toxic to animals. Now imagine what happened when such rains reached the ocean. They exacerbated the oxygen depletion, worsening the already catastrophic situation. What's most shocking? Approximately 95% of all marine species disappeared, and this was due to a combination of factors such as temperature increase and changes in the chemical composition of water. Each of these events alone would have been a catastrophe, but together they led to one of the most massive extinctions in Earth's history. Scientists are still studying how such conditions could have influenced the future evolution of life on the planet. And surprisingly, this period served as a prelude to the rise of dinosaurs, which dominated the Earth for millions of years. The atmosphere began to change rapidly at this critical moment. The concentration of carbon dioxide rose to levels exceeding 2%, which was several times higher than normal. This led to a dramatic increase in temperature, and the planet found itself in conditions similar to the modern tropical climate, but without the ability to cool down. Imagine that as a result of this change, ecosystems began to suffocate literally. The oxygen level dropped to 21%, which had a devastating effect on many species, especially those that depended on oxygen for breathing. Plant spores that could previously survive in these conditions now faced intense competition for resources as ecosystems began to collapse. And the most astonishing thing, the amount of plankton in the oceans decreased by 30%, which triggered a chain reaction as they were the primary source of oxygen for marine flora and fauna. This meant that not only terrestrial species were under stress, but marine creatures such as fish and mollusks were also on the brink of extinction. Scientists discovered that during this period, there was a massive release of methane into the atmosphere, which exacerbated the situation. Methane, being a powerful greenhouse gas, intensified the already severe climate conditions. But that's not all. Amidst these changes, something unexpected happened. Volcanic activity reached record levels, and the gases released added even more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Volcanic regions such as the Siberian Traps became sources of these toxic emissions, and their impact was felt worldwide. Do you know what's most shocking? These processes led to the extinction of 97% of all species on the planet, making this the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. And it was this event that served as a catalyst for the emergence of new forms of life that could adapt to the changing conditions. Survival in the face of a global catastrophe required extraordinary adaptation and courage, and this was precisely what allowed the ancestors of future dinosaurs and mammals to thrive. While a large portion of the biosphere was virtually wiped out, the remaining species began to fill the gaps left by the extinct forms of life. Imagine small lizards, the size of your palm, hunting insects and other small creatures in an environment that resembled a post-apocalyptic world. These primitive reptiles, such as archosaurs, possessed a unique ability to survive. They developed skills that allowed them to migrate in search of food and shelter. Compare this to how modern lizards hide in cracks and crevices to avoid predators. But this is not all. Among the survivors were also mammals that began to evolve to occupy new niches. Their size varied from tiny creatures smaller than a cat to larger forms that could reach lengths of up to 1 meter. What is even more astonishing? These mammals were covered in fur and were warm-blooded, allowing them to survive in fluctuating temperature conditions. But how did they compete with the more powerful reptiles? The answer lies in their ability to be active at night. While dinosaurs hunted during the day, mammals used the night to search for food and shelter. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. Some of them began to develop social structures, allowing them to unite for protection against predators. These groups could number in the tens, forming packs that acted as a single entity, significantly increasing their chances of survival. As the climate began to slowly change, the surviving species began to adapt to the new conditions. For example, some of them increased the size of their teeth to better cope with tough vegetation, while others developed long limbs for quick movement across rough terrain. If you thought this was amazing, then consider this. These adaptations became the foundation for the emergence of the first true dinosaur ancestors, who would soon dominate the ecosystem. And the most shocking part? These ancestors not only survived, but also became the basis for the diversity we observe today, including all modern mammals. The first wave of extinctions, resulting from the Permian-Triassic event, revealed a stunning picture. Entire ecosystems were devastated, leaving voids that awaited new inhabitants. Imagine vast forests, once teeming with life, transformed into lifeless zones where survival became an art form. Species capable of adapting to new conditions began to fill these ecological niches at an incredible speed. For instance, some of the first Triassic animals to fill these voids were archosaurs, the ancestors of modern crocodiles and birds. They could reach up to 3 meters in length and possessed sharp teeth, enabling them to effectively hunt small animals that survived in the disrupted ecosystem. But that's not the most fascinating part. These conditions also gave rise to the evolution of the first ancestors of dinosaurs, who would soon dominate. Meanwhile, some groups of animals, such as mammals, became small creatures that could hide from predators in underground burrows and cracks in the earth. What's even more astonishing? In the Triassic period, the first lizards appeared, capable of moving through trees to reach food in inaccessible places, and on this basis, future species emerged that would change the face of our planet. One of the most striking adaptations of Triassic lizards was the development of special legs that allowed them to effectively climb vertical surfaces. These innovations opened up new opportunities for hunting and survival in conditions where food was becoming scarcer. At this time, Earth witnessed an extraordinary increase in the diversity of life forms, and ecosystems began to fill with new species that had not existed before. This was a period when life on the planet got a second chance, and evolution was proceeding at a rapid pace. For example, in such conditions, the first true dinosaurs were formed, which, as we know, would become the largest and most powerful creatures on Earth, reaching sizes exceeding 10 meters in length. And the most incredible thing? Their appearance marked the beginning of an era that would last more than 100 million years, and it was then that they would begin to dominate the ecosystems that were only just beginning to recover from the catastrophe. After the disappearance of 30% of all species on Earth, caused by the Permian-Triassic extinction, new horizons opened up for reptiles, which became the dominant creatures of the Triassic period. This extinction occurred approximately 250 million years ago and was the most catastrophic in Earth's history, with over 95% of marine species and around 75% of terrestrial species disappearing. As a result of this cataclysm, ecosystems were freed from competition, allowing reptiles to occupy vacant niches. Thus, as forests began to recover, the first large theropods appeared, hunting small animals and utilizing their speed and agility. But that's not all. It was during this time that evolution led to the appearance of the first Triceratops, which had distinctive horns and a shield on their head. Did you know what's shocking? These creatures could reach lengths of up to 8 meters and weigh up to 2 tons, making them some of the largest herbivores of their time. Their success was due to the high level of oxygen in the atmosphere, which reached 30%, promoting the growth of both flora and fauna. At this time, giant reptiles began to appear on Earth, such as the ancestors of lizards and crocodiles, which could reach lengths of up to 10 meters. They used their powerful jaws and sharp teeth to hunt smaller species that were just beginning to recover from the catastrophe. This meant that many ecosystems changed. In water bodies, predatory fish began to dominate, while on land, reptiles hunted mammals and other animals that were just beginning to adapt to the new conditions. Imagine a world where every morning you could encounter a lizard the size of a minivan, and in the air, pterosaurs with wingspans of up to 7 meters soared. And what's even more amazing? These magnificent creatures began to evolve, developing new forms and sizes, which ultimately led to the emergence of dinosaurs, who would reign over the planet for the next 100 million years. While giant reptiles ruled the planet, archosaurs began to evolve in the Triassic forests, becoming the ancestors of dinosaurs. These reptiles, reaching lengths of up to 5 meters, had powerful limbs and could move on both 4 and 2 legs. Imagine them swiftly hunting small herbivores with their sharp teeth and powerful jaws. But what's even more fascinating, archosaurs had a unique skull structure that provided excellent vision and smell, crucial for survival. Their brains were significantly larger than those of previous reptile species, allowing them to develop more complex behaviors and hunting strategies. Archosaurs were divided into 2 groups, predators and herbivores. For instance, the theropod was a predator that hunted other animals using its incredible speed, while the herbivorous Herrerasaurus could reach lengths of up to 4 meters and had a hard shell covering its body for protection. Archosaurs began to occupy various ecological niches. Some lived in forests, others in swamps, allowing them to dominate different habitats. But that's not the most astonishing part. Some of them developed wings not for flight, but for balance while moving through trees. And here's where it gets really crazy. Archosaurs became the foundation for the evolution of dinosaurs, which later dominated the planet. During this time, a true survival race took place. The fastest and strongest individuals produced more offspring, leading to an incredible diversity of forms and sizes. Did you know that some archosaurs could grow up to 6 meters in length and have a wingspan exceeding 8 meters, making them not only predators, but also giants of their time? Each new discovery in this field reveals details about how these creatures evolved and adapted to their environment, leaving us eager for more exciting facts. After the massive extinction of ecosystems began to slowly recover, and during this time, extraordinary forms of life appeared on the planet. Approximately 90 million years after this catastrophe, during the Triassic period, reptiles began to dominate the Earth again. But not only them. Small mammals, the size of modern mice, were the first to restore the ecosystems, wandering among the shadows of giant tree trunks. The most astonishing fact is that these mammals were the ancestors of all modern mammals and managed to survive in conditions where most large species had gone extinct. About 3 million years after the start of the recovery, dinosaurs appeared, filling the niches left by the vanished creatures and hunting small animals, including the same mammals. But this is just the beginning. During this period, plants such as ferns and horsetails began to thrive, reaching heights of 20 meters and creating dense forests where various animal species could hide and develop. Imagine these forests as real jungles, inhabited by amazing creatures like early lizards, the size of small dogs, with characteristic spines protecting them from predators. Moreover, the first true dinosaurs emerged, evolving in various directions, with some reaching lengths of 20 meters. It is interesting that at this time, there were also predecessors of lizards that began to exhibit signs of social interactions, hunting in packs. But wait, there's more. The appearance of the first herbivorous dinosaurs like long-necked sauropods led to a boom in the ecosystem. Their enormous size allowed them to eat leaves from heights inaccessible to other animals. This dynamic created a true food chain, where predators began to adapt to new conditions, developing sharp teeth and fast legs. For example, the first carnivorous dinosaurs like theropods developed powerful hind legs, allowing them to reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, making them dangerous hunters. And here's another shocking fact. At this time, marine reptiles like plesiosaurs existed, reaching lengths of up to 12 meters and hunting fish by venturing into open seas. But the most amazing thing is that these ecosystems continue to change and develop, creating an incredible diversity of life forms that we can still see on Earth today. The era of giant plants not only shaped the landscape of Earth, but also laid the foundation for future forms of life. Imagine forests growing up to 30 meters tall, with vines hanging from trees like enormous ropes, creating a dense green canopy overhead. These giant plants not only produced oxygen, but also served as habitats for numerous organisms that began to evolve in response to new conditions. In these forests, primitive creatures lived, which later became the ancestors of the first reptiles. And now, the most fascinating part. Over tens of millions of years, these organisms adapted, developing survival mechanisms that allowed them to conquer new ecosystems. For instance, during this time, the first amphibians emerged, capable of venturing onto land and conquering new territories that were previously inaccessible. But that's not all. During the Permian period, the climate began to change, creating opportunities for new forms of life. The vast forests started to give way to more diverse ecosystems, leading to the emergence of the first true terrestrial animals. In this time, new types of reptiles began to dominate the land, utilizing resources that were previously unavailable to their ancestors. And here's where it gets really incredible. It was during this period that the foundation for the emergence of dinosaurs was laid, which in the Triassic period became true giants on the planet. If you thought that was amazing, wait until you hear this. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, which occurred around 250 million years ago, was one of the largest catastrophes in Earth's history, wiping out up to 95% of all species. However, it opened new horizons for evolution. The remaining organisms, adapted to survive in new conditions, became the ancestors of dinosaurs and other reptiles, which later dominated the planet. So, without this era of giant plants and the first terrestrial ecosystems, the Triassic period with its magnificent reptiles might not have existed. And the most incredible part? All these changes occurred against the backdrop of global climate changes that not only shaped life, but continued to influence its development. For example, it was during this period that the supercontinent Pangaea began to form, uniting almost all lands into a single mass, creating unique opportunities for migration and adaptation of organisms.